There's a pattern in all great stories. We're at point A, we want to get to point C, but to get there we have to go through point B. And this goes back to Aristotle's Poetics. Aristotle said this: all great stories are made up of intention and obstacle. In order to fulfill a character's intention, they must first overcome a great obstacle.
Okay, let's pause for a second.
What's up?
You know Aristotle didn't say any of those words.
Aristotle wrote Poetics.
But you said those words in English.
Can you prove
Here we go.
that he didn't say these words?
Can I prove, let me get this right. Can I prove that Aristotle didn't speak English?
It is not impossible.
He was in the 4th century.
Okay, less probable.
BC.
What Aristotle was getting at, though, is something that affects all great storytelling. Luke wants to save the princess. The empire gets in the way. Intention and obstacle. Elsa wants to live a normal life, but there's a curse in the way of doing that. Intention and obstacle. Every book you've ever loved, every tale you've ever heard has followed this same pattern. There's a thing they want or need, a what if, and an obstacle in the way of getting it. The story gets really interesting when our characters attempt to overcome their obstacles. This happens in the real world too. To send a long-distance message to someone, you used to need a telegraph operator, and they'd use Morse code to transmit the message. Now we just pick up the phone to call or text or even see the person's face. Designers creating magazine layouts would need scissors and glue and teams of typesetters. This is literally where we got the term cut and paste from. But now they just use InDesign or Canva to make this happen directly. Doing computations used to require a room-sized mainframe and a knowledge of programming languages like Pascal and C, but now billions of people can use spreadsheets that give them computing superpowers. To edit videos, you literally had to cut and splice film together, or swap out VHS tapes using really expensive hardware, but now almost everyone has a film studio in their pocket. What does any of this have to do with Aristotle? Overcoming these obstacles is where things start to get really interesting. Here's how. Whenever we've had even a tiny revolution in these technologies, it's usually been achieved by democratizing something that was previously exclusive to a smaller group. It shrinks point B so much that whoever's at point A can reach out and touch point C. We've seen this same pattern for a while in creating user interfaces. Since long before the work at Xerox PARC, we've been trying to find better ways to use direct manipulation to bring designs to life. For most of the history of computing, it's required a translation step to go from design to code. We know that because a designer designs a UI and they hand it off for development to bring that design to life. And there's a lot of back and forth in this translation step because after it's first built, you could have just 1 or 2 changes or 30. Back and forth we go, round and round, all because we have to translate our ideas from point A to get us to point C. The fact that you even need that translation means most people can't ever get to point C without writing code. And that's because the translation, the work to get from A to C, requires B, which can be highly specialized and hard to learn and expensive, and so very few hold the keys to this process. So many of those who could imagine creating don't have the necessary tools to make it real. So, let's do a thought experiment, a what if. What if designers had the power to create software directly? What if they could do this without requiring a translation step to bring their ideas to life? What if instead of writing the code for an interactive website animation, a designer could build and deliver the whole thing from end to end? What if anyone could turn something like a spreadsheet into a fully functional mobile application? What if creating a new product didn't require learning tons of development frameworks, but instead you could just build it directly based on the rules and workflows you define? And what if powerful websites and web apps were built completely visually? Instead of writing the code in a text editor, what if we could build our designs directly and the code would write itself? And what if delivering to the world all we create didn't require manual deployment and we could just push this stuff directly to production? What if the obstacles that are holding so many people back could be overcome? In other words, the big what if we're trying to answer is this: what if more people were empowered to create things directly without translation? Could we build a bridge from point A to point C that didn't always require going through point B? That's why we're here today. How do we envision the future? Will building software and creating with no code evolve with the same inevitability as communication and print design and graphic design and 3D animation and photography and game design and video editing and illustration?
It's a little long.
It's empowering.
Yeah, the music ended like 8 minutes ago.
Okay, how would you do it?
How would I end it?
Mm-hmm.
I would cut to black.
Okay, and then?
And then I would show the no code conf logo.
No code conf logo. Here it is.
Okay. Almost there. Let's, Miguel, can we add the chord at the end?
I'm way ahead of you.
Perfect.
Welcome to NoCodeConf 2021, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming today. We have people joining us from over 135 countries. That's just unbelievable. I mean, I have to believe it because the movement is growing really, really fast and the numbers are right there for us to see, but it still feels surreal to me. I'm here at the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, where we're going to be hosting a bunch of breakout sessions, in addition to dozens and dozens of virtual sessions from people across the world and across the no-code space. I'm so excited about the agenda for both days of the conference this year. 2 years ago, we hosted the very first No-Code Conf, not too far away from where I'm standing today. And the world has changed so much since then. Today, even more of how we live our lives, how we do our work, how our economies operate relies on the internet, which is powered by software, which is written in code. But it's still the case that less than half of 1% of the world can write code directly, meaning that the vast majority of innovation in software, the stuff that's transformed our lives and the entire world around us, it's come from just this tiny group of people. And it's mostly this tiny group of people who have been able to realize the huge economic opportunity that comes from solving problems through software. With the no-code movement, we don't want to take that power away from anyone, but rather also put it into the hands of the billions of people on this planet who don't code. What drives us is pretty simple. We believe that if we can remove a lot of the obstacles that stand in the way of most people creating software for the internet, if we multiply the number of people who can build for the web, we can unlock so much more creative and economic potential and make the craft of software development so much more human in the process. What would shattering that code barrier enable? How much complexity would that eliminate? And most importantly, how many real human beings could we empower? And what previously unimaginable possibilities would we see come to life? Because 100 times as many people could harness that true power of software development. That's why we're all here today at NoCodeConf. We want to push the limits of what we can all bring to life with no code, removing the obstacles in our way to empower more and more people, designers, entrepreneurs, teams, entire companies, to bring ideas and experiences and entire products to life in a fundamentally more intuitive way. And since our last conference, we've seen rapid acceleration in the no-code space. Tools like Figma and Framer are transforming the way people are designing and prototyping user interfaces. Companies like Glide and Adalo are bringing the learning curve way down to create powerful mobile apps. Airtable is bringing us the power of data to solve for what previously required complex databases. VoiceFlow is transforming the way people build for voice and chat. Bubble and Uncork are enabling companies to build complex web applications. Productivity tools like Notion and Coda are even bringing traditionally code-like solutions to docs and wikis. Even Apple is putting the power of no-code automation into the hands of every iPhone and Mac user with shortcuts. And people are starting to connect and combine a lot of these tools to do what was previously only possible with code. Services like Zapier and Parabola are helping us connect different tools together, different services that trigger actions based on what people configure visually. In fact, most of what people are able to do in these tools today used to require teams of engineers to solve. With all of this, more manual work is being automated. People are making a living. New businesses are being built. Existing businesses are transforming how they work. All of this because these no-code tools empower more people to create directly without a translation layer in the middle. And what we've clearly seen is that it's way more than a trend. Not only is no-code elevating the power of computing to a visual interface, but just like we witnessed in the early days of the internet, when it transformed from a hobby to a powerful way to connect and build and do more, we're seeing no-code being used across the entire world to benefit the lives and businesses of millions of people. We're even starting to see companies create formal full-time roles with titles like no-code developer and visual developer, which would have been really hard to believe even just a couple of years ago. And despite the label no-code that has come to represent this category of tools, I mean, it's in our conference name. It's actually all powered by code under the hood. What we're actually doing is taking the systems that software engineers have created, refined, and battle-tested over the last 50 years, and taking many of the code-based APIs that are used by engineers today, and adding an intuitive user interface on top of them. This doesn't remove any of the actual code behind the scenes, but it instead hides it behind a visual interface. And that brings all of the power of those code-based primitives to the rest of the world that doesn't code. So there's actually not much magic under the hood. We're taking proven software engineering principles and concepts and building blocks and making them accessible via direct manipulation. So what are those core software engineering concepts, you might ask? Well, they fall into three major pillars of software development. The first is UIs, user interfaces, which we talked about in the intro. This is how people interact with a website or application. For the web, front-end engineers use technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and frameworks like React to build UIs with code. The second pillar is data, or a store of all the structured records behind the scenes. It could be all the content stored in a CMS for a marketing site, or all of the users and photos and comments stored in a database for a huge service like Instagram. Backend engineers typically set up databases like MySQL and Mongo to store and retrieve all this data with code. And the third major pillar is logic, or all the custom decisions and workflows and actions that happen when a user does something through a UI, or something in the database changes. Logic is basically, if this happens, then something else happens as a result. For Airbnb, it might be logic that runs all the payment and booking code. If someone hits the reserve button, then send a text message to the host of that property. For YouTube, if someone uploads a new video, then insert a new record into the video database and trigger emails to certain subscribers. Each application has tons and tons of custom logic, and software developers use programming languages and frameworks like Node.js and Ruby on Rails to write all of this logic and code. No-code tools are taking all of this code complexity across UI, data, logic, and infrastructure, and dramatically simplifying it by hiding and automating all the things that can be automated. Let's just take Webflow as one example, and how we've started to tackle some of these pillars. Webflow, of course, focuses on the first two pillars, UI and data. In fact, when we launched Webflow in 2013, we unlocked the ability for people to harness the power of HTML and CSS to build websites and UIs visually. It unlocked the same tags and styling properties that developers were using, but made them available through an interface that automatically generated production-ready code behind the scenes. And what happened when designers discovered that they could create the same kind of super custom, highly interactive production websites as some of the best developers in the world, creative output exploded. And millions more people started building high-end responsive websites directly without having to translate to code. A few years later, we expanded into data by building our own CMS. But we didn't just build a traditional CMS that only stores basic things like pages and blog posts. Instead, we decided to make it really flexible, like the databases that developers use, so that you could create pretty much any kind of database structure or schema, regardless of what kind of content you might be storing in it. This meant that you could now create and manage a database without code. Airtable did this too, by the way. So what developers are creating with programming frameworks and SQL, things like creating, updating, and deleting records via code, was now possible to non-coders who also wanted to harness that power of building with data. But the true power emerged when we combined these two pillars together. We made it seamless to pull live CMS data from the database directly into the UI and design with that live data right on the canvas. While the two concepts of UI and data are really powerful separately, bringing them together created something far greater than the sum of their parts, while still resulting in exactly the same end product, a production website or an application that is powered by live data. Gone is the obstacle and the friction of translating all this to code manually. Now, Webflow is just one example of this trend of moving development into the visual realm, because we're seeing people connect all sorts of no-code tools together to do amazing things. I mentioned Zapier earlier. They're really leading the charge here to help connect multiple tools and services, all through a point-and-click UI. But the idea here is a powerful one. The connection of just two of these pillars of software development unlocks so much more than either one of them in isolation. And since our last conference, the no-code space has grown tremendously. Terms like visual development and citizen developers are becoming more commonplace. The tide is clearly starting to shift when it comes to no-code no longer being seen as a hobby or a toy. It's finally being seen as a powerful tool for individuals and companies to solve really important technical and business problems faster. But with all the progress we've made so far, we still have a long way to go to bring the full power of software development to no-code tools and platforms. It's really the very early days of this movement taking shape. But that's also what makes it really exciting to me, because the vast majority of what we need to create to empower the world to build for the web is yet to be invented. But before we go deeper on what the future of no-code might have in store for us, I want to pass it over to Bryant and the team back at Webflow's San Francisco office for an update on Webflow's customers and community, and to talk about some really exciting things that we've been working on. Bryant?
Thank you, Vlad. I'm really excited to share some of the progress that's been made since our last No-Code Conf, and we'll start with our customers. At Webflow, we've seen massive growth in terms of designers, developers, marketers, people who use Webflow, who rely on robust, powerful tools to create and host world-class websites. Together, this community has published over 1 million new websites since our last conference. And our customers are using Webflow to build these powerful interfaces, and they're combining them with data to produce world-class and award-winning sites without writing code. With freelance designers like Nurav Suthar, who in just 14 months not only surpassed the $100,000 mark in freelance revenue using Webflow, but started working with clients like Gumroad and Johnson & Johnson, an absolutely incredible portfolio. And that's just one of thousands and thousands of stories of freelancers and agencies who aren't just building on Webflow. They're making a living and growing entire businesses with Webflow at the core. And of course, we're seeing this at companies like Mural, whose marketing team uses Webflow to build out their main.com. Since moving to Webflow, not only have they 10x'd their development speed because they're not having to use up valuable engineering time, but since launching on Webflow, they've doubled their conversion rate and seen an absolutely huge lift in their self-serve revenue. Attentive is using Webflow to power their .com. They migrated from WordPress and did a full rebrand on Webflow, and they saw a substantial lift not only to traffic, but SEO rankings and impressions. Zendesk is using Webflow, Dell's on Webflow, Upwork, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Discord. What we're seeing over and over, whether we're talking to solo freelancers or agencies, marketing teams, or major enterprises, we're seeing story after story about how Webflow is empowering more people to build and launch production sites that are transforming their entire businesses. Today, we're going to take this so much further as we're expanding what we can do, the power you have on the Webflow platform. And to talk about collaboration, I'm excited to pass it over to Jay-Z.
Thanks, Bryant. A theme that comes up over and over with so many of our customers is how people are using Webflow together. Whether you're building Webflow sites with clients, sharing creative work with other people, collaborating with freelancers and contractors, or you're using Webflow across your business, we're constantly hearing from our customers who are building and maintaining mission-critical sites with others. So the first thing we want to announce today is an expansion of how teams work together in Webflow. This summer, we started the shift by bringing collaboration right into the Webflow designer, meaning different people can edit content while the primary designer is developing. We also launched the ability to request and give control, all while previewing who is collaborating and working live. And that was laying the groundwork for what we're announcing today and what will follow in early 2022. So, today, we're announcing 2 different things. The first one is simplified workspaces, and the second is roles and permissions. Let's start with workspaces. We're consolidating individual and team account plans into a single concept, and that's workspaces. This removes the hassle of account setup as you and your team and as your business scales. So whether you're a freelancer adding collaborators, an agency managing a more complex group, or even a large business with tons of collaborators across different departments, you can quickly and easily add seats to keep your Webflow workspace agile and efficient. And here's where it gets interesting. With roles and permissions, we can now structure how we want to get work done. In other words, we care about who can do what. Because if you're like some people like Reamer, who remain nameless, you could accidentally unpublish a production site that's visited by literally hundreds of millions of people. So maybe you want to control that access. Who can publish, who can manage account settings like billing, and who can add team members to the workspace. With roles and permissions, you can structure how you want to get work done with your team or your clients. Control over who can do what. So we're announcing the shift from individual and team account plans into workspaces. Webflow scales with your team as your team scales. And you control who can do what in your workspace with roles and permissions. And we're going to be building from here because this work sets up so many of our upcoming investments in collaboration. Being able to add teammates only to specific sites, the ability to add roles exclusively for commenting and annotation, and the ability to add specific roles for content. These are content-only team members you can add to your workspace. And that's collaboration in Webflow. To take us through our next major Webflow announcements, I'm going to pass it back to Vlad.
Thanks, Jay-Z. So with collaboration in Webflow, you can build and launch production sites, combining all the power of UI and data that you've come to expect from Webflow, together with your team and your clients. So that's collaboration. But we're just getting started, because today we're going to share product announcements across all 3 of the major pillars of software development that I mentioned earlier, starting, of course, with UIs, or user interfaces. Back to you, Jay-Z.
Thanks, Vlad. We're thrilled with how Webflow is being used by our customers, whether it's designers, agencies, marketing teams, and really companies of all sizes. What we hear over and over are stories of how our customers are using Webflow, not just because it's a visual development platform, but because of its power. So when it comes to building UIs, so much of that power is found in Webflow's Style Panel, where you can tweak precise style and layout properties by directly manipulating the same CSS that developers usually write by hand. Arkway?
As software developers, we're constantly referencing MDN and the CSS spec and cheat sheets when we're building out UIs for our product. And that's why the CSS preview tool in the designer is really interesting to us. Federico, by the way, this is Federico. Federico built this feature, and it's a great way to not only see the CSS that's being generated, but it's a great reference as we're actually developing. In fact, Federico literally used Webflow to design and iterate on this user interface. So he used Webflow to design and build the tool he's building to preview the CSS using the CSS tool he built. Are you following that thought?
I'm completely following.
And we do this all the time. It's not so much that Webflow is some kind of web builder. That's not its advantage. Webflow's advantage is that while you're using the style panel to define these properties, the code is writing itself. So is it really no code?
Yes.
No. Well, yes. We're manipulating the styles directly, and the CSS code is being generated automatically, without the need to translate anything. So what we're doing here is taking all the power of, let's say, CSS Grid. We design and iterate right here on the canvas, and the CSS is generated for us. So when we publish for the world to see, the CSS that's generated is exactly what ends up in production. That's the power of direct manipulation. It's not overly abstracted or built in complex templates or presets. That relationship is one-to-one, from the style panel to the CSS that's generated. But it's not just that the CSS is generated. All the code is compiled automatically. So there's no need to pass it off to a developer to get this into production. It's already done with the press of a button.
Actually, it's 2 presses.
2 presses of a button. But the other advantage with that is if we want to integrate our own custom CSS, we can usually just add it on top of what we define in the style panel, because all of this is exactly what a developer would write. Jay-Z?
Thank you, Arkway. Today, I'm really excited to announce that we're adding 2 additions to the style panel to unlock even more for building powerful UIs. The first is blending modes. If you use tools like Photoshop, this will feel like second nature. Because when elements or layers stack on top of each other, blending lets us achieve different kinds of looks based on the mode we select. If we had to code this manually, not only would we have to reference the syntax or copy it to the clipboard, but we'd have to remember which blending mode does what. And that's a huge pain for designers and developers. To show you how we're solving this in the Webflow Designer, I'm going to pass it over to Sada.
Thank you, Jay-Z. Blending modes usually apply to an element in the foreground, and what they end up looking like is based on the elements behind them. So, for this example, you can make a selection, and of course, we have all our CSS, all our styles right here in the style panel. But now we can go down and add our blending mode. And instead of guessing which mode does what, the result is previewed live on the canvas, right as I go over each of them. So I can just hover over, and that's the one I want. Looks good. And that's a pretty good start. And because we have things like the Webflow interactions engine, we can combine things like animations, which we can see right here in preview. Back to you, JC.
Thanks, Ada. With blending modes, not only can we stack different blended elements together, but we can add complex interactions to these elements. All of this native to Webflow. And blending modes is available to all Webflow users today. But that's just the first one. The second addition to the Webflow style panel is backdrop filters. With backdrop filters, you can take any element you want and control what happens to transparent areas inside that boundary. We see this being used very creatively on the web, notably on apple.com for their navigation. To show an example of backdrop filters in action, I'm going to pass it back to Sada.
Okay, second demo of the day. Here I have my navigation, and using the background color we already set the opacity so it's a bit transparent. As we scroll, we can see the content behind, but the contrast is high enough so that we can still see the foreground against the background. But let's go down and add a backdrop filter. And from here, let's set our blur. And watch this. Now, when we scroll through the page, everything behind the navbar is blurred. And it gets better because we can stack filters. Let's add another effect on top of this. Let's increase the saturation. Of course, we might also want to adjust the brightness here. Just tweak the values and stack the filters exactly how we want. We can also switch between visible and hidden for each effect. So we can stack as many as we want to achieve all kinds of looks. This is just the beginning, and we can't wait to see what you build next.
Thanks, Ada. Backdrop Filters ships in beta today with support in most major browsers. For a lot of the stuff we're showing here, we reached out to some of our Webflow experts. These are expert partner agencies and freelancers. And in just 2 days, they explored different ways to use backdrop filters and blending modes. And the results are incredible. The Webflow designer gives us full control over building beautiful custom user interfaces. And all of this outputs the same code a developer would write, meaning you can build natively in Webflow, integrate custom code on top of these properties, or even hand off directly to a developer. And that's building powerful user interfaces in Webflow. And now I'll hand it back to Vlad.
Thanks, Jay-Z. Webflow is setting the standard for speed and precise creative control. With a full suite of direct style and layout properties, and now the addition of CSS blending modes and backdrop filters, we're going to continue to unlock for designers and visual developers the kinds of superpowers that front-end engineers have today. So that's what's new for UI. But like I mentioned before, it's when you combine these UI capabilities with data, that's when things start to get really interesting. And I'm really excited to talk about our data capabilities for a few reasons. First off, when it comes to data, we've seen incredible sites come to life with the Webflow CMS. For the first time ever, designers can design with dynamic data with full control over custom styling and layout, but without having to write CSS or spin up databases or figure out how to write API calls to pull data into the UI. And everyone from solo freelancers to major businesses have noticed. Data-driven CMS sites have expanded dramatically on the Webflow platform, making up the vast majority of websites and projects launched to production with Webflow today. Also in the data bucket is e-commerce. We see e-commerce products and payments, whether it's selling physical goods, digital goods, or even services, as a specialized form of data. Having access to payments as a key building block when creating an online experience visually is such a huge unlock. And we're seeing tons of businesses start and grow on Webflow e-commerce. And the way that commerce data, things like the products you sell, is stored securely in the backend and tied directly to our UI design tools, just like our visual CMS integration, that means more designers can create unique e-commerce experiences by using all that data to build completely custom.
Excuse me, Vlad.
Who's this?
It's not important. You keep saying all that data. It's just those data.
Wait, is it really those data?
Yeah, it kind of is.
That means more and more designers are developing custom e-commerce solutions by using those data to build completely custom interfaces. And finally, the last thing in this data pillar, today I'm really excited to announce that we've been going through an architectural overhaul of our entire CMS data infrastructure, which is unlocking major performance improvements for sites with lots of CMS items and e-commerce products. To talk more about this, I'm going to pass it back over to Arkway.
Thanks, Vlad. The changes to our data architecture are all about performance. And the way it works is this. Let's say we have a large site with a ton of CMS data. The advantage of managing something like this in Webflow is that you can visually develop these complex page designs, and you can bind or you can point the elements in your design to the data in the CMS. And our customers are pushing the Webflow CMS to new limits. And they're using this data infrastructure on everything from dynamic, CMS-driven sites to powerful custom e-commerce experiences. But today, we're announcing that we're re-architecting the way CMS data is used in the Webflow Designer. So you can do more, and you can work faster and larger and more complex sites. And I'll pass it to Jay-Z to talk about how this affects the product experience.
Thanks, Arkway. The results are substantial. On complex sites, loading up a project in the Webflow Designer is now up to 15 times faster. And we're seeing 6 times less memory usage in the browser, and a staggering 86 times less bandwidth needed on load. Our partners at FinSuite may have said it best. Projects with 3,000 CMS items now feel like lightweight 100-item projects. Now, it's not just speed. All of this has resulted in dramatically increased stability and performance on sites with more data. The Webflow CMS is empowering our customers to create some of the most powerful dynamic experiences, and they're doing it visually, without needing to spin up database instances, without needing to patch and maintain the server infrastructure, without needing to write SQL or make custom API calls.
Now, for these changes and enhancements, we've been testing larger sites with select customers already. And today we're starting to open up early beta access to these features so that more people can start experiencing these dramatic improvements with our new data architecture. And we're really excited to build on top of this. We're already investing in building out better bulk item workflows and increasing maximum items in the dynamic sites to support much larger data sets. But this is only our first announcement in data, because the second one is the ability to create users natively in Webflow. Jay-Z?
So much of what's built on the web, so much of the value created on the internet, is based on systems that allow people to log in. And there are a lot of reasons, a ton of use cases, in which we want to create really impactful experiences based on who's logged into our site. Nearly every software experience you can think of today, from Airbnb to Netflix to Masterclass to Lyft, even Hopin, all these experiences are based on the simple idea that the application is customized to the user who signs up and is logged in. So far in Webflow, this hasn't been natively possible. Even if you build a great UI and connect it with custom data, the experience is generally the same for everyone who visits the site. This is why adding users as a core building block in Webflow is such a big deal. By creating unique experiences based on who's logged in, and by controlling who gets access to what, we're going so far beyond the traditionally accepted idea of what a website is and what it can do. Users in Webflow is based on 3 core concepts. The first is the basic concept of adding a user database to your site. And to demonstrate how this is done in Webflow, I'm going to pass it over to McGuire.
Thank you, Jay-Z. 2 things right off the bat. First, we're covering a lot here with users, so we'll go through as much as we can in this part of the keynote. And second, Jay-Z, your laptop has been hovering this entire time.
I know, right?
So let's start with adding users. In this keynote example site, aptly named by Jay-Z Keynote Example Site, we have content here that we only want logged in users to have access to. In other words, we want to make sure someone signed up and logged in before they can access this content. In Webflow, we can now head on over to users. And when we add users to the site, we unlock a ton of control right out of the box. Because if we go to the Pages panel now, we can see a million new options.
6 new options.
We can see 6 new options. From the login page, the sign up page, all of these, we can control the experience down to the pixel. These aren't fixed in a template pages. These are rich, make it 100% your own, customizable pages with all the power you've come to expect from Webflow. So if you want to build out your sign-up page to fully match your brand, you can do that. Because this is all native to Webflow, you can fully integrate your existing styling, even interactions, to create custom experiences that previously required a fusion reactor and advanced training in thermodynamics. Jay-Z?
Thanks, McGuire. So we're just getting started, and we have a lot more to show you here with users. So once you create a user database on a site, you can manage those users from the Webflow Designer. You can customize transactional emails and fully design all the pages associated with users. That's the first part of users in Webflow. The second part is gating content through access groups. Depending on whether we want our gated content accessible to all logged in users or just some users who come to our site, now we can control that. McGuire?
Thanks, Jay-Z. From access groups, we have full control over gating content based on who's logged in. So if we want to create an access group that lets us say, hey, these courses can only be accessed by users who've signed up and logged in, we can do that. We can define what content this group has access to. And just like that, we've set up gated access to some of our protected content. So if someone tries to access a link to one of the courses now, do they immediately get access to the course? No. They're prompted to log in or create an account for your custom site. And Webflow handles all the user authentication details, and it stores all the user data associated with that site securely. Jay-Z?
Thanks, McGuire. All of this used to require engineers or a lot of custom integration work. But with access groups and gated content in Webflow, we're no longer just designing static sites or even dynamic sites. We're able to start building secure, user-driven experiences without code. Now, what about the third part of this? We showed adding user functionality and the power that unlocks. We showed access groups and how we can gate access to content based on what group a user belongs to. But the really interesting question is this. What if we combined different data building blocks together? We've seen the power of combining UI and data. And we've seen examples of how CMS and e-commerce payments unlock superpowers. But if our major building blocks in data are CMS items, e-commerce products and payments, and now users, what if we combined all that potential? In other words, what if Webflow e-commerce didn't just let us sell goods or downloads or services? What if we could sell access to gated content? And what if we could create subscriptions and paid memberships to access that content? Well, that's exactly what we did.
Membership sites have transformed the internet. With platforms like Masterclass, they've created some of the highest quality teaching on the planet. And when you get an annual subscription, you unlock their library of courses. The concept of paid access in Webflow, this builds right on top of what we covered earlier, enabling user accounts and controlling access to gated content. But now, with memberships in Webflow, you can monetize content. You can charge for access, whether it's a one-time payment or even a recurring subscription. And the sky's the limit. You can create e-learning platforms, membership-only experiences. If you're a freelancer or you're an agency, you can create gated client-only sections. You can create your own version of Patreon. You can charge for premium access in all different categories like health and wellness, on-demand content, and of course, premium templates for Microsoft PowerPoint 2000 and XP. But let's take our example.
You can't.
What's that?
Everything was really empowering.
Totally.
And then you said PowerPoint 2000.
And XP.
Oh, okay. If it's XP.
So back to our example from earlier, what if from our access groups this time we changed the group type? What if we change it from free access to paid access? Here's what that unlocks. We can create a membership product directly in Webflow. And we can define all the parameters for that product, whether it's a one-time payment for lifetime access or it's a recurring subscription that we bill monthly or annually. But either way, we're all thinking the same exact thing. How is all this stuff getting typed and clicked? Is it magic? Only partially. Greemer is actually typing all of this off screen with a second Bluetooth keyboard, which is also hovering about a meter off the ground. But this gets so much more powerful. With Masterclass, you sign up for an annual membership and you get full access to all of their content. So it's a similar example to what we're creating here. However, you can also create multiple paid access groups. Different access maybe for a bronze plan or a gold plan.
But you skip right over silver.
True, thanks Arquay. If you want to create a silver plan, you can do that. Different access to different free and paid membership levels. Jay-Z?
So, native memberships in Webflow. Create unique experiences based on who's logged in and offer free, paid, and even tiered memberships to gated content.
And this is all just the beginning, because there's so much more here as part of memberships. This isn't a feature that's in a vacuum or in a silo. It's fully integrated throughout the product. Because of that, we get all the precision, the same full support for the UI and data tooling we talked about earlier. That means you can build these experiences using all the power of Flexbox, CSS Grid, 3D transforms, Webflow interactions, and bold text.
Sorry, what?
What's up?
Did you just say bold text?
Yes, Webflow supports bold text. And now, back to you, Vlad.
Thank you, Arquay. I hope you can all see how memberships builds on the fundamentals of bringing together full control over UI and bridging it with user data to control access to certain parts of a site dynamically based on who's logged in. Today, memberships is in beta, and we're capturing feedback and investing heavily here to make this one of the most powerful ways to build custom membership experiences. And it's just the start. The concept of users is such a foundational part of almost everything built on the web, and we'll be sharing much more in this area in the future. Okay, so far we've covered some big updates across the first two major web development pillars in Webflow, UI and data. With capabilities like users and memberships, our vision for what's possible on the web is extending far beyond the traditional static or even dynamic content websites. But to make our ultimate long-term vision a reality, to bring more of that full power that software engineers have today into the hands of everyone, we believe that UI and data building blocks, as powerful as they are not enough. And that brings me to our final Webflow announcement today. I want to give you a preview of something big we've been working on that we believe will dramatically expand the power of Webflow's platform. Let's talk about the third major pillar of software development, and that's logic. What if, as you're designing UIs and working with real data in Webflow, you also had the ability to visually declare custom workflows that describe exactly what you want to happen when a certain user event takes place? What if you could declare how you want user actions in the UI to update and change your CMS data? Developers call this business logic, and it makes up a massive amount of the work that's written in code. And today, we're announcing that we're bringing the power of visual logic natively to Webflow. To show you what we mean, I'm going to pass it over to Maguire at the Webflow studio.
Okay, here's how logic works in Webflow. We'll do this in 3 examples. For the first one, we have a lead generation form here, which is built in Webflow, and it captures a lot of critical information. And there's this specific field here that lets us capture the size of the organization. So in the designer, we're going to create a workflow. We're going to create a workflow that's going to get triggered when this form is submitted. This visually describes all the things we want to happen when the form is submitted. And we have so many options here. For instance, we can do something really basic and add a simple block. But this block is powerful because this block takes every single form submission event and it sends an email to Greamer. Now, is that the pinnacle of what we can do in logic? No, because that's pretty boring. And you can already do that with Webflow form submissions today. But what if we could start making decisions based on the data that a user submits? So let's focus on, for this example, let's look at the drop-down field in the form. When someone fills out the form, they're specifying the size of their organization. So here we are in a new workflow, and here we can actually add a condition that says, hey, for businesses that are bigger than 500 employees, let's send an email which will notify the VP of sales. But we can also define a second outcome if that statement is false. If the business is smaller than 500 employees, we can route that notification to Greamer. And let's say we wanted to add a final step and send a thank you email to the person who submitted the form. Well, we can just add one more block, which will execute regardless of whether the company is larger or smaller than 500, because the execution path comes together after the condition.
With logic, we're opening up the ability for people to specify custom workflows based on actions and conditions they define. So instead of just one thing happening, it can be millions of different options based on exactly what you want your website to do. This makes what people build in Webflow so much more powerful because now they're able to author business logic without having to hire a developer or write complex code. But for our second example, we're going to take this even further. Let's say we're building a specialized job board in Webflow, and someone visiting the site, a business owner let's say, goes to the site to post a new job. They want this job picked up by a freelancer. So when the business owner fills out the job summary, all the details, they're telling us about the project they want to post on the job board. Budget, geography, skills needed, all that stuff. Now, here's where logic comes in. We can specify exactly what we want to happen in the backend when the form is submitted. Previously, this required a developer writing backend code or cobbling together multiple tools and APIs to achieve the same functionality. But with logic, we can specify exactly what we want to happen based on certain conditions. First, when this form is submitted, we can set it up so the person posting the job receives an email, notifying them that their job was submitted successfully. We know we can do that. That's a simple email block. And we can also specify that we want to take this data.
Those data.
We can take those data and pass all of it to the Webflow CMS. We can do that by adding a create CMS item block that lets us do exactly that. So here's what happens. When someone submits a job to this job board, we can actually map the submission so that all these job details get put into a Webflow CMS collection. And as an additional output, we can add another block so that the site maintainer receives an email notifying them of a new submission to the job board, which they can approve before making the job go live on the site. Jay-Z?
Thanks, Arkway. For our third example, we're actually going to combine everything we just did for the job board, but we're going to add payments and users to the mix to create something that'll work like magic.
It is magic.
And what you can... Sorry, to be clear, it's not actually magic. It was hyperbole.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable
from magic.
It's Asimov.
No, actually that's H.G. Wells.
It's neither of those. But we are going to demonstrate what feels like magic with our third example. Here we are in our job board. And let's say we want to make our job board more powerful. What if we want freelancers to be able to pay for access by purchasing a subscription to premium job listings that have a budget over $100,000? So not only will we have a standard job listings collection, which we already built, but we will also have a premium job listings collection. That premium collection, all those high budget job listings we want to share with freelancers paying for premium access, we can gate that content. We can gate access to premium listings using memberships. So now, in our workflow, which is triggered by the job form getting submitted, we can add a condition. And that condition lets us specify if the budget is $100,000 or more, then add this form data to the premium job listings collection. However, if the budget is under $100,000, we can instead add the form data to our standard job listings collection. And just like that, we can create a whole job board with users. And we can configure how everything works behind the scenes with logic.
Let's just take a second to figure out what just happened. We have a UI that captures data. We also have this database where we want this data to go.
It's these data.
Where we want these data to go. But logic is what connects this, because it's taking the input from the UI and it's passing it directly to the database based on the logic we defined visually.
And we're not worrying about maintaining and debugging all that backend code because the logic in Webflow takes the rules we're setting here and automatically executes that logic for us.
Again, you're defining triggers based on some feature you've built into your site. And the actions resulting from those triggers are happening based on the rules you define visually. We're so excited about the power that logic in Webflow unlocks. But these are just 3 examples that barely scratch the surface, that only start to illustrate what logic can unlock in Webflow. Back to you, Vlad.
Thanks, team. In Logic, we'll go way beyond enabling custom workflows when forms are submitted. That's just one of the triggers. Imagine having visual control over anything custom you want to happen when a CMS item is updated, when an e-commerce order comes through, or a user signs up for your new paid membership service. The sky is the limit here. We're creating logic to be very flexible and extensible to unlock millions of possibilities. And we're really excited to share more about logic in the coming months. By adding logic to Webflow, we're finally unlocking all 3 of the major pillars of software development, and doing so in a very integrated way that removes a ton of complexity from trying to stitch these capabilities together through code or really complex integrations. You can think of logic as the central nervous system that ties it all together, including UI and data, when creating powerful web experiences. And on top of all that, we're taking care of all of the infrastructure and hosting to run this all in production. Webflow is already powering more than 10 billion visits a month to websites that our community creates, which, by the way, is more traffic than Amazon and Twitter combined. Again, not much magic here. We're taking the best practices and systems developed over decades by software engineers and making these core building blocks accessible to more people via direct manipulation. We believe that creating a truly integrated no-code visual development environment will remove so much of the complexity we see today in website and software creation, which will help so much of the world gain access to the creative and economic potential of the internet. So, we covered a lot today. In collaboration, we announced workspaces with roles and permissions where you can easily scale your teams or collaborate with clients in Webflow, as well as define specific roles and permissions. This will be rolling out in January. We talked about building powerful user interfaces, creating stunning, best-in-class websites and UIs with the power of Webflow, precise control over style and layout, our powerful interactions engine, and now native support for CSS blending modes and even backdrop filters. You can use those things in Webflow today. And of course, let's not forget Archway's favorite feature, bold text. We also covered some major improvements we're making to our CMS data infrastructure from managing and designing with all this data. These improvements include big performance gains that make data-driven design faster and more efficient than ever, and pave the way for increasing our CMS limits in the future. We also talked about memberships in Webflow. For the first time ever, you can create user logins, gate content based on access groups, and create free and paid subscriptions, all through our best-in-class designer. And memberships is just the first big step towards helping you build more user-centered websites and applications in Webflow. And with the announcement of Logic, we're taking all of this to the next level, combining all three facets of software development natively to empower more people to create, to build super powerful websites, to grow their businesses, going so far beyond what you might expect from a traditional website. We want to empower all of you to bring your ideas to life with the power of no-code. Here's how Webflow is taking that to the next level.
When they said, you can't create a custom website without knowing how to code, we said, challenge accepted. And just like that, people like you, designers, creatives, and visionaries, were building professional-grade, world-class websites with Webflow and without code. You were the innovators who proved the power of Webflow. You didn't want to code, and you didn't have to. You were creating entire web experiences and stunning user interfaces using a visual development platform that works the way you do, by seeing, solving, moving, and building without a single line of code. But progress requires more than websites, so you started to wonder, can we do even more without code? Can we create user logins? Enable online purchases? Connect to other systems? The answer is yes, because we're redefining what's possible once again. We're unlocking the power of logic and expanding the power of design and data so you can achieve exponentially more. Build solutions with dynamic data. Create membership communities. Trigger actions through logic. And launch what's next. All with a completely visual, shockingly powerful platform that brings your ideas to life exactly the way you intended. What used to require a team of developers can now be done by you. Welcome to a new era of no-code, powered by Webflow.
That's what no-code is all about. Taking what used to require a team of developers and bringing that power to a lot more people. And obviously, it's not just Webflow powering this movement. There's so many people and companies here today that are applying this no-code philosophy to bring the power of software creation to the masses. I think we all truly believe that by removing more obstacles that stand in the way of people creating for the web, actually developing software that solves real problems, we're unlocking so much of the creative potential that's held back because people just don't have the right tools to bring their ideas to life. Together, we're breaking the code barrier in order to let a lot more people through the door. And walking through that door unlocks creative expression, the ability to build new products, and build wealth for so many more people. And despite the early fears that no-code tools would reduce the value of learning how to code, that couldn't be further from reality. We need developers now more than ever to keep building and improving the tools and systems based on code that no-code platforms rely on. Also, the growth of the no-code movement over the last 2 years has actually increased the demand for software engineers. By empowering many more people and companies to create websites and applications and bring them to market faster with no-code, we've generated an even greater need for software engineers to solve more complex problems where code is still the best solution and will be for a long time. This space is incredibly large, and the chance to empower the 99.5% of the world that doesn't code to have even a fraction of the superpowers that developers have today is full of exciting possibilities. I hope that you're inspired by what's still possible. Whether you're someone who's just learning no-code tools to start a new career or build for clients, or you're a growing company that relies heavily on no-code tools to work faster and smarter, or you're a startup creating more no-code tools for others to use. We're just getting started, and there's so much more discovery and innovation in the no-code space in the years ahead. But one thing is certain already, because we can see it every day in this community. The kinds of things that could only be built by teams of engineers in the past are already being built in no-code by you. I'm so excited about the next 2 days. We have a lot in store. From the team at NCC TV, there to guide you through all of this, to the over 40 talks, deep dives, and conversations from no-code creators and leaders across the entire world. We have thousands and thousands of people joining us today from over 135 different countries. That's unbelievable. We have conversations coming up with the host of the award-winning podcast Design Matters, Debbie Millman, and my live conversation with comedian and host of The Daily Show, Trevor Noah, to kick off tomorrow. I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to join us. Thank you, and enjoy the conference.